Hello and welcome back to the We Are Careers show, and hope you're having a fantastic week wherever you are in the career sphere. Sabiha, how is the week treating you so far?
I can't believe that it's almost the end of the week. Does anybody else feel that way that's watching or listening to us on Spotify, that where did the week go? I want to give a warm welcome to you. Yes, you lovely, amazing viewers who are committed and rock up every time we launch and drop one of these episodes. And if you are watching this show for the very first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. The We Are Career Show is your fortnightly go-to for career professionals working within the UK, but also beyond, because we know we've got many, many international career professionals now who are joining in and listening to this podcast, and as well as on Spotify. And the aim is very simple. It's for anyone who's in the career space who wants to improve and enhance their continuous professional development by finding out about the latest issues impacting the career development sector. And each show, our aim is simple. It's to bring you the latest updates in the sector so that you can be kept well informed. Plus, we bring you an inspirational guest based on the topics that matter to you. And we've definitely got somebody that's got a lot of energy and a great topic to share as well with us all today. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm known as Sabiha, and I help international job hunters stop struggling and start thriving. And as always, I have my amazing co-host, Chris Webb. Chris, what do we have coming up in this episode today?
Yes, I think it's going to be, again, another very topical one, and one that hopefully will be of interest to a range of different careers professionals. So we're back kind of focusing on that topic of higher education. Obviously, 'tis the season. It's the start of the new academic year. And of course, kind of in recent years, we've been hearing a lot from previous government particularly, but also a lot of mainstream media channels about this idea of kind of questioning the value of higher education, and particularly asking that question, are too many people going to university? So what we wanted to do was kind of unpick that a little bit to kind of see, is this sort of empty rhetoric, or is there a bit of truth behind this? Is it a bit of an oversimplification? And to help us with that, we have got a man with a wealth of experience in this area, and that is Johnny Rich of Push Talk. So Johnny, warm welcome to the show. Please tell us a little bit about yourself for maybe any viewers or listeners who haven't come across your work before.
Well, hi, Chris. Hi, Sabiha. And hello, everybody. Thanks very much for inviting me on. These days, I have various roles. As you mentioned, I'm the chief executive of Push, which, as many of your listeners will know, is an award-winning non-profit organization that delivers sessions on careers choices, employability, and study skills in schools all over the country, and we have done for the past 30 years. But I'm also the chief executive of the Engineering Professors Council, which is the representative body of the UK's engineering academics. And then I have various other smaller roles, such as being a member of the advisory board of the Lifelong Education Institute. Earlier this year, I became a school governor, specifically supporting a school with their sixth form and careers activities. And meanwhile, I have various sidelines doing a lot of education policy work, working with various think tanks, doing speaking engagements, writing articles, books, and so on. Basically, I try to keep busy.
You definitely do sound like a busy man, Johnny. And I'm sure we've got other professionals who are joining us today who probably perhaps maybe not wear as many hats as you do, Johnny, but perhaps wear a couple at least. So thank you for that amazing and phenomenal sort of kind of introduction to yourself. And I'm sure our viewers are resonating with one or more of what it is that you do. Now, this is the part of the show where we do our careers cheers. So anybody watching for the first time, this is the bit now where we celebrate and we remember some of the amazing practice that is taking place in the careers space. Now, it's a time for us to celebrate innovative and inspiring members of our careers community, or simply it's about giving a shout out to something positive that's happening in the careers world since our previous show. So Johnny, let's start with you. What is your or who is your careers cheers for the week?
Well, I'd like to give a nod to a guy called Mark Corver, who isn't a careers advisor as such. He's a data analyst. And many years ago, Mark used to work for the DFE. Then he went on to work for UCAS, where he became their data analysis supremo. And then he left to set up a company called Data HE. And the reason I think he's deserving of Careers Cheers is that there is no one who provides a better analysis of the trends in university applications in real time than Mark. And the thing is, what he puts out there isn't just exciting reading for data nerds. And I have a tendency towards data nerdery myself, but it's genuinely useful for careers practitioners who want to understand what's really going on with the application patterns in any given year. And this can actually be helpful to advise their students. So this year, for example, clearing was not exactly typical in that there were a lot of places available, even in quite selective institutions. And Mark was tracking all of these patterns and was predicting them in the days and weeks before results day. And so, yeah, do follow him on LinkedIn or on Twitter or various social media. Well worth watching out for the snippets of wisdom that he blesses us with.
Oh, I love that. And I'm a bit like you, Johnny. I love a good sort of kind of nerdy session looking at sort of data analytics. And I would imagine, I've not come across his work, but I would imagine, Johnny, that his work really helps institutions as well as individuals make informed choices. So this is really great. So speaking of career shares, I also have picked out an individual as well. It's somebody who I've been following for some time. And you'll probably notice a pattern, folks, of sort of where my career share stories are coming from. It would be the phenomenal platform LinkedIn, and my career shares goes out to Liz McGuire, RCDP. And the reason why I've selected Liz this week is because she posted recently about career development professionals and our tendency to sometimes perhaps be too self-critical, because the desire to do our best job in one-to-one guidance means that we often overanalyze what went wrong or not to plan. And she came up with this phenomenal list, and I would definitely recommend, if anybody's, again, sort of interested in thinking about how they work and looking at ways of improving your practice, but in a way that isn't harming the way that you do your practice, then definitely check out this particular post that Liz has created, because she's given us a list of the different ways that we can think about, rather than just thinking hard at KPIs, which I think sometimes is useful to have, because the work that career professionals do doesn't always fall into one bucket. So check Liz McGuire, RCDP, on LinkedIn. So that's my career share. Chris, who or what did you pick for this week's show?
Oh, it's a who for me as well, or kind of a group of who's, I suppose. So we've talking obviously about kind of higher education today. It's the start of the academic year, so mine's a little bit topical as well. And I'd like to give kind of a careers cheers to all student union SAB officers that are out there. So these are kind of the executive officers that are basically based within the students' union. They're elected from the student body each year, so they might either have finished their degree or they might be midway through their degree, and they represent the kind of student body in a range of different ways. So you have a student union president, you'll often have education officer, an activities officer, an equalities officer, for example, and they're really there to kind of provide that sort of bridge between kind of the student body and the students' union, which is an independent entity, and then the university itself, and do a huge amount of work in terms of making sure that universities are more student-centered. So it's one of those jobs where I think unless you know someone who's done it or have done it yourself, it's really hard to overstate just how intense it is, particularly at that early stage of your career. And I met with all of our kind of new SU officers at the University of Huddersfield this week. Absolutely brilliant bunch. They've got some amazing priorities for the year, a couple of which kind of cut across the work we're doing in the Careers and Employability Service. And they were just so receptive, so happy to work with us. And, you know, it really is kind of one of those roles that can make such a big difference to everyone, institutions, students, student services, all these sorts of things. So massive careers cheers to any SU SAB officers that might be listening to the podcast.
As a former SAB myself, I'm going to definitely second that one.
I love that. As you say, folks, I want you to, for those that are listening and watching us, who pops into your mind when we're doing these careers cheers, or maybe you're joining us for the first time? Who do you think about? And I'd like to take this minute actually and an opportunity to say, if you are enjoying the content that we are producing, and if you would like us to get even more inspiring and inspirational guests, and we're coming to Johnny in a second, then please hit that subscribe button, hit that repost button. Let's get this message out there to as many other professionals that we are aware of who could benefit from these podcast series that we create. And so that brings me on to Chris. What is the main topic that we're going to be diving into with Johnny today?
Yes, thanks, Sabiha. So, yeah, we talked obviously kind of at the top of the show about this sort of broad overarching topic of higher education and actually kind of what's happening in terms of people's assessment of the value. And that, I guess, big ticket question that we often see sort of repeated in the media quite a lot, are too many people going to university? Is that a thing? And so, Johnny, I think to kind of come back to that as our first question, we have the critics of kind of higher education who predominantly keep using this statement, I think, around kind of being more directive. Too many people are going to university. But what's your kind of perspective generally on that statement? And I guess the way that sort of the value of higher education is perceived in relation to that statement itself.
Yeah, I don't even understand the statement, too many people. Too many for what? Too many for whom? If people want to go to university, then it's not too many as far as they're concerned if they get a chance to do so. If employers are willing to pay more for graduates than for non-graduates, and the data clearly shows that they are, then it's not too many for the jobs market. And if the country wants educated and skilled people working in the public sector, in the arts and in the third sector, where they may not be earning as much as in private business or and may not be getting that graduate premium, as it's called, but they are fulfilled and adding to society by doing so, then it's not too many for the country. So when you hear that someone say that that too many people are going to university and you ask them for evidence, they usually cite a friend's son or daughter who did a degree and is now working in McDonald's or somewhere. And they don't, that is, frankly, it's very insulting to anyone working in McDonald's. But what they also don't tell you is that that person is more likely to end up running that branch of McDonald's than a school leaver at 16 or 18. And that person is also more likely, if they so choose, to get a different job after gaining useful experience at McDonald's. So, I was struck, there was some recent research out by Universities UK, which many people may have seen, that said that even after the state has met many of the costs of higher education, each graduate contributes on average a net of £77,000 more in tax contributions than an equivalent non-graduate. So is that too many people going to university? I don't think so. We need those £77,000 from all those graduates. And one final thing, really. When people say too many people go to university, it's code, I think, for one of two things. Either that they resent people having an opportunity that they never got, or that they resent people that they consider inferior to them having the opportunities that they had. And I find both of those absolutely despicable attitudes. So too many people going to university, it's difficult to imagine a sentence that typifies old-fashioned class divisions in UK society more neatly than that. And I believe in opportunities for everyone to be able to have agency in their own lives. I believe in sustainable economic growth. I believe in growing human understanding for its own sake. That's three reasons why I think that not enough people go to university. That said, sorry, go on.
No. I was just going to say, but I think it's interesting that you frame it that way, because yes, if you were to kind of put to most people, do you want your population to be very educated or not as educated? I think people would, it's a fairly easy answer. I guess where the sticking point often comes is kind of what people mean by educated and the mechanism for educating. So I think coming back to the money point, which I think is a really important one, often what seems to get kind of caught up in the simplification of the debate is reference to other forms of education and training. So things like degree apprenticeships, for example, where the point will be made, well, this is, it's not costing the individual, that money. They're still kind of becoming a graduate within the economy. And so actually, why should people spend all this money on university? But I think recently you've been talking about this, haven't you? This idea that actually, yes, the funding model as exists now doesn't really work for anybody. And there should be things we're doing to kind of change that, to make sure that it is more kind of fairly funded across the board.
Well, it's very kind of you to bring up my proposed funding model. I wrote a paper for HEPI, which is the Higher Education Policy Institute, which is a think tank dedicated to higher education. And in it, I proposed a graduate employer levy. So in brief, and it is a complicated proposal, but in brief, this would do away with tuition fees, and instead of currently the student loan repayment being paid alongside the employee's national insurance contributions, instead it will be paid alongside the employer national insurance contributions. So for the employer, I want to stress, this won't cost them any extra. It's the same amount of money. It's just which side of the national insurance contribution line does it come from? And this way, if that money then goes back to the institution where the student studied, it gives the university an incentive to look towards skills shortages, to look towards the labour market, and to not offer courses where endless courses where there may not be job opportunities. But students will still get to choose what they study and still get to find places to do so. But if they want to study, they will find it easier to get into courses where there's a labour shortage than they will find it to get into careers where it's oversubscribed. And even if they want to go and do something that isn't career related, there will be a significant incentive to the university to make sure that every single graduate leaves with employability skills. Whether you've studied philosophy, whether you've studied engineering, whatever it may be, you are job ready, and that you understand that the skills that you've learned in philosophy are going to be useful in a job as well. And I say that as a philosophy and English graduate.
And I love that, Johnny. I love that you're sort of kind of weaving this story and this narrative of where the value is for both employers as well as for the individual, and that element of employability. I mean, there's so many points there. Folks who are listening right now, which part of what Johnny is sharing with us today are you resonating the most with? Or do you have a completely different perspective on this topic? And if you do, join in with the conversation. One area that I do want to explore with you, Johnny, now that we have you here, is that underpinning a lot of the commentary about university apprenticeships and technical education is this idea of purpose or value of education. So what do you have to say with regards to what students are actually taking in terms of qualifications and engaging in learning for various sort of kind of purposes? And then also that sort of kind of what value is there for the individual that's going off to university, but also as well from a careers perspective, how helpful do you think this sort of discourse is? And are there better ways for us to frame the role of education within an individual's career journey?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think it goes back to what Chris was saying also about degree apprenticeships, because when people say too many people go to university, often they're talking about too many people going to an old-fashioned, 3-year boarding school type of model of higher education. That isn't what most people do these days. I mean, it is obviously a significant proportion, but that's not all that higher education is. And we need to recognize that degree apprenticeships are also going to university in one sense. You study a higher education qualification as part of a degree apprenticeship, and all of these means of gaining higher education are about, if you ask me, this word agency, or you can call it choice, you can call it self-determination. It's the difference between saying to a young person, you've got to go and do a job, or you get to go and do a job. And this is something Push talks about a lot when we do our employability sessions in schools. We're often talking, articulating in this way to say, what do you want from your life? And that may be money, but in many cases, especially with young people, it isn't only money. They want a sense of agency. They want a sense of fulfillment. They want to do something worthwhile. They want to do something they enjoy. They want to work outside. They want to work with animals. They want to work with people. There are all sorts of different things that they want. And so what is it that you have got to contribute in order to get what you want? How's that transaction going to work? And what you have got to offer is this word employability. And how can you develop employability? There are basically only 3 ways to develop employability. And they are education, training, or experience. And so given that education is so critical as one of those 3 columns, I would like to see more of it, because we get more of that, and that means we have more people who feel fulfilled and have a sense of self-worth, and we also have a better economy.
Yeah,
it's a win-win.
And it's really interesting you say about the perception of who's in higher education, because I was reading some data the other day about what proportion of students across the UK and universities are commuter students or classed as commuter students. It's much, much higher than I expected. I think, they're looking at something close to 40% now, something in that kind of bracket, that sort of fits those numbers.
Do you think, Chris, that's because of the cost of living crisis? And so people are now reevaluating what university life looks like, and so more students are staying at home?
I think it's actually a bit more complex than that. So there's been some research that's just been done by a couple of colleagues at the University of Bradford around the experiences of kind of commuter students, particularly in terms of kind of career development. And interestingly, one of the things that came out of their research, it's JISC funded, we'll put it in the episode notes, you're going to have a read of it if you want to, is actually the fact that the number one reason that was cited was convenience, not necessarily cost. And so more a lifestyle thing rather than necessarily just the cost of living thing. Sorry, John, come on.
Well, I was just going to add, I agree entirely, Chris, and the residential model is more popular than ever, in that there are more people choosing that model than have done in the past. But higher education as a whole is more popular than ever. And so the other types, the less traditional forms, the commuter student, the part-time, well, not so much the part-time student, but we'll come back to that perhaps. But the commuter student, the student who's studying in an FE college, but studying a higher education qualification, and students doing all sorts of different models of higher education. All of those have grown massively as well. And so there is a higher proportion of all higher education students who are doing different models than used to be the case, but the absolute numbers doing this residential model have also grown.
Yeah, and I think to come back to your other point that you were making there around the employability side, I mean, do you think there's a risk there at all when we get into these conversations about sort of the value of education? Obviously, as you said, with the kind of funding sort of model that you've suggested, there'd be incentives for universities, particularly to get kind of graduates, quote unquote, kind of job ready or sort of more employable. At the moment, there's already that incentive to an extent in terms of things like graduate outcomes, the Office for Students progression metrics, all these kind of types of things that universities, take very seriously. Do you think within that there is a risk that the kind of view of education, both within the eyes of universities and possibly even prospective students, becomes kind of too determined on an outcome as opposed to a process? Is there a risk of that potentially happening?
I think that's a really astute point. And I think, so the Office for Students has its B3 conditions, which some listeners will be aware of, which are basically the test of quality or satisfactoriness for English universities, because the OFS is England only. And these B3 conditions are very much outcome focused, employment rates, employment, not employability, employment rates, and dropout rates and things like that. I think it's far more important. The thing they don't allow anymore is any benchmarking against what types of students are coming in. And I think that's really unfair, because you need to look at the distance traveled. If you take students in from, a highly selective independent school and they've got 4 straight A's or A stars, and then they come out with a good quality degree, great. And that's wonderful and good for them. But the distance traveled is not that far. But if you take somebody in who has done non-traditional level 3 qualifications and has had a difficult route to get there, and faces challenges, financial, social, domestic, all sorts of challenges along the way during their higher education, and yet they qualify with a good quality degree. That's a much greater distance traveled, and actually that's probably the person that if we look in terms of national investment in somebody, that person has yielded a lot more return for the national investment than the student who frankly probably could have walked into a nice job anyway.
Well, yeah, that's the interesting part, isn't it? Yeah, when we think about this idea of return on investment in higher education, yeah, who are we thinking of it for? And as you say, often I think those kind of comments about who should be going tinged with that element of kind of classism and a bit of old-fashioned kind of perception of HE, I guess. Yeah.
We should look at outcomes, but we should only look at outcomes in the context of distance travelled. And I think distance travelled is more important than absolute outcomes. And
I think certainly many careers professionals, but I think many universities would probably also agree with that, no matter how much they're trying to kind of push towards existing metrics. We're rapidly approaching the end of the show. So Sabiha, kind of, I'll just bring you back in very quickly. I mean, any thoughts on sort of what we're hearing so far around value of education? I know that, you work with graduates, you work with people who've been through the HE process or looking to kind of go into HE. Any thoughts really on what we've heard so far?
I honestly think Johnny has sparked thought bubbles going off in my head. I'm thinking about, I love this idea of mapping the journey that people have taken, and someone will have, even though the end outcome is exactly the same as person B, person A may have to have done a lot more to achieve that particular outcome. And so I think for me, that is a real clear indicator. And how do we make education accessible? And is the type of conversation that we are having hampering and hindering those who we would like to encourage in university education? So these are food for thoughts that you've left me with, Johnny, as a result of today's discussion. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Chris, as we wrap up today's show, what are your final thoughts? And what can folks expect of us from the next show?
Well, I think, typically I could talk about this topic all day, as you probably kind of gathered as we've been kind of going through the podcast, but I think I will definitely leave the final thoughts to Johnny. So I guess, Johnny, if we've got anybody who's been viewing or kind of listening to the podcast who's been particularly interested in this topic, maybe wants to read up a little bit more on it in terms of conversations around the value of education or some of the kind of references that you've been making during the show. Any particular kind of suggestions in terms of maybe where they can go to find out more, any links, sources, recommended reading, or any just final points you'd want to make before we wrap things up?
Well, certainly from the policy side, I'm going to have to give a shout out to HEPI that I mentioned earlier and to Wonky. If you work in higher education and you don't know who Wonky is, you don't work in higher education. Very valuable resources there. If I start to give you too many resources, I won't know when to stop, and you'll be going, Johnny, sorry, this podcast has been going on for 3 hours now. Can you stop? So if anybody would like to know more, obviously drop me a line. Follow me on Twitter or BlueSky, or get in touch at ask@push.co.uk.
Fantastic. Thanks, Johnny. Yeah. And again, if you're listening or whether you're kind of watching this, just as a reminder, we will put all of the kind of references, the links, the resources that have been talked about during the show. We will make sure those are included in both the YouTube description and the episode notes on Spotify. Do kind of have a look at those. We'll also include kind of Johnny's details if you want to kind of check out his LinkedIn profile, find out a little bit more about him and the work of Push as well. So do take a look at all of those when you get the chance. But that brings us very nicely to the end of the show. We always run out of time. We'd always love to spend a little bit longer on all of these topics. But if you are listening or watching and this has kind of piqued your interest, you think, okay, we'd like to maybe delve into this in a little bit more detail in another episode, or you've even got some suggested guests for us, let us know. So you should be able to kind of comment on the YouTube videos, or of course, you can get in touch either through the CDI or by kind of following myself or Sabiha on LinkedIn and dropping us a message. But as I say, that brings us nicely to the end of the podcast. A massive thank you to Johnny for giving his time to join us today on We Are Careers. A huge thank you to all of you that have been watching or listening at home. And again, we will see you in a fortnight's time in the Career Sphere for our next episode. See you then.